Chapter 1. Silence. The underbelly of a spacecraft is entirely devoid of noise, for the most part. While working under a ship, you might hear the buzz of conversation from your shipmates, or the occasional call of some strange animal. Working on cars, you hear the near-constant noise of turning wrenches and jokes betwixt co-workers. Working on planes, the noise of the airport. In space, there is nothing. He was so far below the dance hall that even the faint hum of music passing through several layers of steel was lost to his ears. There were only the dull vibrations of the ship's interworkings and the drip of water that he was currently attempting to fix. He held the welder up to the leaky pipe. A trivial leak, but even so, should the fluid levels be miscalculated by so much as an ounce, it could bring the entire ship out of orbit. The welder flashed like the sun in the palm of his hand, but his helmet automatically filtered out the light. He almost was able to see right through the light, and to him it looked as if he were just applying glue to the leaky pipe. He finished, and then everything was truly devoid of noise. No more dripping water to keep him company. He looked down at the small holographic computer mounted on his wrist and checked his remaining tasks for the day. One of the generators underneath the galley needed new brushes. He sighed and closed the light green display on his wrist. His footsteps echoed through the winding maze of gray pipes. Clank, clank, clank. The electromagnets underneath his soles resounded. He moved with all the speed of a man paid by the hour, although he was paid by the trip. To others, the ship was a vacation to the stars, a way to escape the dreary life on planet Earth, to get away from all their toils and troubles for a while. To him, there was no woman he loved more than Mother Gaia. He longed to hear the sound of slapping waves on the beach again, to smell pine needles, to feel even the bad things like mosquito bites on his flesh. But this would not come for several thousand more hours. They did not keep track of days in space, only the hours, and he had 2,160 hours left to go. He climbed down another ladder, growing even farther from humanity. He was truly alone in the endless mechanical void, with nothing but his own thoughts to keep him company. He found his generator after 30 minutes of traversal. He had to crawl through small gaps, climb over large equipment, at one point even jump a small gap where failure would have meant breaking his legs. Regardless, it was all irrelevant. Once his destination was reached, he opened up his wrist computer and found it strangely devoid of signal. He tried multiple times to connect to the generator. His computer simply gave him an error. He looked all over the large metal housing for the generator, searching the manual switch for it. At length he found it, although he had to crawl into a tight space which he could hardly fit through underneath the metal behemoth. Once turned off, he began the arduous process of opening it up to observe the inner workings. The brushes were worn down, chipped and cracked, held in manually by clips about the size of his hand. He allowed himself a slight chuckle, thinking about how even here on the frontier of tech, everything was held together by things as simple as nuts, bolts, and clips. It took him around 30 minutes total to remove the old brushes and substitute them with new ones. He checked the time and saw it was frozen to the exact same time it had been when he had departed from the dispatch hub. 0333 Zulu. His face bunched up beneath his mask. Swiping on the wrist display, he navigated to his radio communication tab and punched the digits for Central. Static blared through his earpiece. He jumped with fright, banging his helmet on a nearby pipe. He swore loudly and scrambled to turn the radio off. He stretched his neck, then navigated back to the radio tab. He sent out a one-way transmission. Hey, comms. This is mech number 076. If you're getting this, I'm reporting that my maintenance and repairs are finished for the day. Radio signal seems to be really sparse down here. I'm gonna call when I'm closer to the elevator just to confirm. Over. He began the long trek back to the elevator. Back over the gap, back through the small cracks, back up the ladder. It was a slog. At some point, he realized that something was dreadfully wrong. He stopped, his ears perking up, listening as if he might hear something. It was all missing. The familiar hum of machinery, the faintest noise of synth music rumbling through the steel walls, any noise from other mechanics working on their projects. All of it was gone. He took his helmet off to hear better, thinking perhaps his audio-enhancing software was malfunctioning. It was dead silent. He could have heard a pine needle fall to the earth. He opened up his communications tab again and tried to dial the numbers once more. Blaring static emanated from his helmet. He hung up and put the helmet back on. The blue screen displaying his vital signs seemed to be his only company in the world he existed in. At length he arrived at the elevator. The buttons were displayed in the dim blue light produced by the backup battery's energy. He mumbled obscenities under his breath as he punched the code to call it down. The backup battery only had a lifespan of 48 hours from its activation, and he'd already wasted around 8 of those while he was working, although he had no real idea how long the power had been out. He punched the elevator code and heard it whir as it descended down to him. The cylindrical elevator stopped in front of him, and the doors opened on their own. There were no lights on the inside, as was supposed to be the case. He punched in the number for Central Communications again on his wrist. Hey, Central. Mech number 076 again. I really have no idea what's going on right now. Seems like the power's off? I'm heading back up to the elevator right now. If you guys get comms up again, please give me a call. See you shortly. The elevator doors closed. The comforting sounds of elevator music was gone from the little metal tube as it began its ascent. It agitated the mechanic. The music which had so often accompanied him on his way down and back up. The elevator speakers had been almost like an old friend to him. As he looked around, he noticed something peculiar within the tube. 3 red dots were pressed into the doors, and there was a small crimson puddle just beneath them. He knelt down and looked at it. The medical window on his helmet screen popped up, inquiring if medical assistance was required. He dipped his fingers into the puddle and withdrew them. He held the crimson up in front of his face, looking at it through the night vision lens over his eyes. He rubbed his fingers together, testing the consistency. It was liquid. He shook his head, unable to make anything of it. He wiped his fingers on his metallic pants, then opened his wrist computer and closed the medical window. It made him concerned, but then again the entire situation was concerning. He flipped the flashlight on his helmet into the on position and kept his hand close to the plasma knife on his hip. The elevator stopped. The doors slowly opened. The parts of the ship designed for human beings to inhabit was much more pleasing to the eye than the rest of the ship. Red velvet carpets stretched onwards as far as the eye could see. The hallways were laid out less maze-like and more grid-like. The walls were metal, but painted to at least give the illusion of wood. The whole hall would have normally been lit by the orange glow of overhead lights, but since the power was out, it was lit by dim blue glow sticks lining the walls. "Hello?" the mechanic called out. There was no response. He walked down the hallway, slowly as if each next step could end his life. He looked this way and that, and saw nothing but locked hotel room doors. His gloved hand curled around the handle of his cutter, ready to draw the plasma blade on anyone or anything that might show face. Nothing ever did as he made his way down the hall. He made a shortcut through the dining hall, even though technically mechanics were not supposed to do that. He thought that there could be an exception just this one time. The dining hall was more taxing to his psyche than he initially thought it would be. It was laid out like some ancient king's banquet table, complete with candlesticks and an intricately embroidered tablecloth. The room was dead silent and completely empty. He called out again and heard a slight echo as his cry bounced around the upper rafters of the room. He decided right then and there he didn't feel like walking all the way around the table and opted to climb over it instead. Moving past the dining hall, he entered the kitchen. It was as if everyone had suddenly disappeared from the space. Dishes were left halfway baked, measuring cups dropped on the floor, scattered various spices, half-chopped vegetables with a knife left embedded into the cutting board, pots of soup left to simmer now gone cold. He was too terrified to attempt to call out for other life again. As he walked through the exit to the kitchen, he noticed the dark red splatter at the bottom corner of the door. He wanted to believe it was red wine, but his gut told him otherwise. He moved on through endless corridors. One long hallway led to another long hallway, all of it dark, all of it lifeless. Some with red shag carpet, some with cold metal steel, some meant for humans to walk through, others meant for only mechanical personnel to take shortcuts through. He arrived at the central communication room for the mechanical department. His finger hovered away from the holographic number for a few moments, too terrified to punch in the code. What if everyone had left and he was the last one on the ship? What if Jesus had come back and raptured all but himself? What if he had slipped into some horrible alternate dimension? The thoughts flooded his head. The keyboard chimed with each press of the button, briefly illuminating the press number in white. The doors slid open, retreating into their holes inside the walls. Nothing was immediately out of the ordinary as he walked in. Men sitting in their chairs, errors flashing on display screens, cups of coffee and stray pieces of paper scattering the hard metal desks. He heard a splash as his foot came down. He looked and saw his left boot was ankle deep in a dark red liquid. His eyes widened, his breathing came faster. He followed the puddle of crimson upstream and saw it flowed from a nearby corpse. He would have tried to convince himself that the corpse was alive somehow, but the lack of a head crushed any hope of that. Its blue jumpsuit was stained dark red. The mechanic wanted to scream, but found it caught in his throat. He turned, some part of his mind trying to cope with the situation he was in. Perhaps the others just hadn't seen their friend be decapitated in some freak accident. But as he ran to investigate, he found nobody in the room was alive. The man in the middle of the room, the overseer, looked normal from the back. However, upon seeing him from the front, his jaw was hanging on by a single string of tendon. The other men had similar wounds, however, few were removed from their chairs. Whatever it had been had struck quick. Blood coated the floor and desks. He looked on one of the screens. There were hundreds of unopened communications within the last hour. He saw his number pop up twice. The doors to central communications closed behind him. He tore his helmet from his head and vomited. He wanted to scream. He wanted to yell, to punch the wall, to let out his fear physically in some way, shape, or form. But he found himself instead quivering like a leaf in the wind. His knees were shaky, threatening to collapse underneath him. He stumbled backwards into the door from whence he'd came and sank down to a squat. He breathed slowly, trying to collect himself. He had to think about his next move. The next move that seemed most appealing was to jump into one of the escape pods and leave, but there was still the off chance that this was nothing more than a freak accident. He had to find out what happened first. He decided he would return to his berthing and try to sort things out from there. Rising upwards, he unholstered his plasma cutter. He flipped the power switch to the on position. A beam of plasma about the length of his hand shot out. It glowed blue, illuminating his surroundings. Scooping his helmet off the ground, he placed it back on his head and continued on his path. More winding corridors, endless hallways. A once serene location turned into a rat cage by something as simple as a lack of light. He thought he heard something clang off in the distance, but wasn't sure enough to deter his path. Another 10 minutes of walking. He arrived at the door to his berthing. He took a long, deep inhale and let it out slowly. He knew nothing could really prepare him for whatever might be on the other side of the door, but he had to try and steel himself. His index finger extended, and the number pad pinged as he punched the code in. The metal doors slid open. Blood was everywhere. Chunks of flesh had been ripped off and thrown around like trash. Gore splattered everything, leaving bloody trails behind it from where it had been thrown into the walls and slid down. He felt a crunch under his boot as a man's jaw snapped in half underfoot. He was sure there were some familiar faces, but they were so mutilated that he wouldn't have recognized them. For the first time, the mechanic let out a blood-curdling scream of horror. This has been The Monolith, Chapter 1, Episode 1, whatever you want to call it, written by Warren Walker and read by Warren Walker. Intro music and outro music by Carl Casey. You can find him on YouTube, Bandcamp, Spotify, wherever you get your music from. Thank you so much, Carl, for providing your music royalty-free. One of the major things that was holding up production for this was I was planning on paying a buddy for intro and outro music. Some things just wound up happening in his life. So I really wanted to push this forward anyways and get a project started this winter. So I just went ahead and looked for other intro music. That intro music and outro music is subject to change at some point during this quote-unquote show's runtime, lifespan, whatever you want to call it. If you can't tell, I'm kind of shooting from the hip as far as this outro goes. I just wanted to afford some time for y'all to get to know me a little bit, because this is more than likely the first thing I will drop on YouTube, Spotify, platforms like that. For those that don't know me, I would consider myself an author before recorder or podcaster or whatever you want to call doing this right here. My passion is writing, really anything creative, but I specialize in writing and work my craft of writing. I've got 2 novels out right now. I'll provide a link to those in the description. They're a little bit different kind of beat though, so if you like this but you look at those and you don't necessarily like those, that's fine. I'm all over the place with what I do. I love just about every genre. What else do I want to cover while I've got your attention here? Just in case I haven't mentioned it, I am kind of rambling at the end here, but that's fine. It's a first episode. We're allowed to ramble a bit. So in case I didn't mention it, thank you so much for listening. Thank you so much for bearing with me till the end. I know the audio was a little bit glitchy. It might be a little glitchy here at the end, too. This is my 6th take of this outro, and generally the same ramble with this mic. If you notice the mic's a little bit different, that's because I'm recording this after I recorded the episode. I had the first 5 episodes recorded, then my dog chewed up my good mic. So I'm still trying to figure out kind of how to get this mic to where it sounds as good as the other one. I know the audio quality itself is really good on the other one. There's some background noises here and there. I really apologize for that. There's only so much I can edit out. There's only so much time I can spend getting these knocked out. I'm kind of a guy with the mindset of just keep pushing forwards. So I really hope it wasn't too big of a deal. I'll try to make sure that doesn't happen in future episodes. Most of those noises are the aforementioned dog. He's big and he's rambunctious. So yeah, that's pretty much it from me. I just wanted to give credit, give thanks. I hope I see you all next week. If you liked it, subscribe so you don't miss the next episode, which drops next week. If you didn't like it, don't subscribe. No skin off my back. Carry on with your life, and I guess you never hear from me again. I hope I see you all next week, though, for episode 2 of the Monolith, where we'll pick up exactly where we left off with the mechanic in a bit of a sticky situation. Good night, and God bless.